Welcome once again to Dialogue on Public Issues. I'm John Channing, host with Campbellsville University. Today we are here to discuss election 2020, the upcoming November 3rd election, approximately a month away as we do this interview. And let me note that as we do this interview, it is the afternoon of the first presidential debate. So I will not be able to have my two distinguished guests and political analysts to be able to discuss the outcome of the first presidential debate. But let me welcome Dr. Shawn Williams and Dr. Josiah Marineau, a political scientist at Campbellsville University. Welcome.
Thank you. It's always great to be here.
Thank you, Dr. Channing.
Let's begin with a broad question pertaining to the presidential election. Obviously, that's the topic of great conversation. You can't turn on any of the talk shows or news shows without that being the main topic. President Donald Trump running for a second term, Vice President Joe Biden in his third race for the presidency, approximately 30 days out. Dr. Williams and then Dr. Marineau, how would you evaluate the general race in general terms at this point? Dr. Williams.
You know, it's interesting when you were talking about your lead-in. I was reading an article in The Guardian, and they were saying that the race is just now starting to heat up. And my initial reaction was, oh my goodness, if it's just now starting to heat up, what's the last 30 days going to be like?
Good point.
It feels like it's quite probably the longest presidential election in history, in part because the Democratic Party's nomination process was really bunched at the beginning, but it also ended relatively quickly compared to the last couple of elections. So we've been locked into Biden versus Trump for a few months now. And the thing that's been most striking about it is that Biden's strategy appears to be just don't mess this up. And so he's been really laying low. So you've had this really long campaign that feels really intense, but where one side isn't really doing much to try to advertise or campaign for itself. They're just trying to use what President Trump has been doing as kind of an opposition foil and running a campaign that way. And it appears to have been reasonably effective, but it feels like an unusual election season.
That's a very interesting observation. Dr. Marineau, your thoughts and general analysis of the race approximately 30 days out.
I think at this point, it's Biden's race to lose. He's ahead in the polls. A website that I use for a lot of my polling information, 538.com, gives him a 70% chance of winning. So he's favored to win, which doesn't mean it's 100%. Trump certainly still could win over the next 30 days. But at this point, it's his race to lose. It looks like he has at least a 50% approval rating. Trump's is about 42%. So that's a pretty wide gap. That's a lot of real estate to make up for President Trump over the next 30 days. And I agree with Dr. Williams. It looks like the strategy of the Biden campaign has been to make the election a referendum on Donald Trump. And you see that in terms of how Biden has not put himself forward as much as a typical candidate. I think part of that has to do with COVID, not holding public events. Mm-hmm. But it seems to be the strategic decision that they want the election to revolve around whether or not the voters want 4 more years of Donald Trump.
How much of the Biden strategy, Dr. Marineau, do you think is related to COVID versus what you just said versus a third factor, concern that Biden might make a mistake, a serious, grave mistake that might limit his campaign or hurt his campaign?
Well, on that last point, Joe Biden has had a history of making gaffes. And I suppose if they haven't heard him yet, it would have to be pretty significant to make a difference among voters. So, but I think that is perhaps a factor. As far as making it COVID versus revolving around Trump, I think even if we didn't have COVID, I think the Biden campaign would still want to make the election a referendum on Trump. And the reason for that is Trump's approval ratings have been historically low for any first-term president. I think his has been among the lowest in history. So it seems like there's a strong contingent of the country that feels opposed to the president. And I think they're trying to capitalize upon that. So even if we didn't have COVID, I don't think it would be fundamentally different.
Dr. Williams, any thoughts on that question?
No, I think that's exactly right. if anything, I think COVID's probably harmed Trump more than it has covered Biden. Joe Biden was never going to be the candidate like even a Bernie Sanders or a Mayor Pete that could bring 15,000 people into a Coliseum like Donald Trump can. And Donald Trump has been able to have crowds of 25 and 30,000 in the past. So Biden's strategy would always have been to not try to play to the large crowd, not try to have the large over-the-top campaign that an Obama would have done in 2008 when he was running for his first term in office with Joe Biden as his vice president. And so if anything, COVID might have provided some cover for him for not holding these large rallies and these large events that would not have been his strength, even if he were to.
At this point, 4 years ago, there was general conventional wisdom that Secretary Clinton was leading the race, and a sense that Donald Trump would not win the presidency. How do you think Biden's candidacy at this point compares to both the strengths and weaknesses of Secretary Clinton's candidacy at this point, and the overall temperament of this race? Dr. Williams?
Joe Biden is less of a candidate with a much smaller downside. And by that I mean his ability to engender support from his base, to mobilize voters to get to the polls. They weren't what Hillary Clinton had, because she had a very loyal following. But Hillary Clinton's problem, and I think if we were to go back and redo the 2016 race, we would see this, or Hillary Clinton's problem was that she had a lot of potential negatives. And at any given moment, one of those could come up. And that's exactly what happened. In the last few days before the election, Comey goes on television and says, we've decided to reopen the case into the emails. New evidence has come forward. They don't actually, in a timely fashion, walk that back. And the result is that Hillary Clinton loses by about 75,000 votes scattered across 3 or 4 states, while still winning the popular vote. I think that if you take back that announcement, you give her those 75 or 100,000 votes back, and then she would have narrowly won in those 3 or 4 states in the Midwest. And so I think that's kind of the difference. With Joe Biden, maybe you can go and say that there's something that might come up about his son. But for the most part, he's been in the public view for a number of years. All of his scandals have already been litigated in public opinion. There's not really anything new that you can say that we just discovered about him in the way that you might have with Hillary Clinton because of her scandal-prone past.
Dr. Williams, Marineau, your thoughts on that same general line of questioning?
Sure. So one of the strategic mistakes of the Clinton campaign was to take for granted the so-called blue wall states. So states like Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, those states went blue in previous presidential elections. The Clinton campaign thought that they could just sort of write them off and compete in different states. That strategy backfired spectacularly. They almost all went for President Trump. I don't see the Biden campaign having made that same mistake. And if you look at current polls, which in polls aren't always 100% accurate, but if we look at current polls, in most of those battleground states, the Biden campaign is either slightly ahead or in some cases significantly ahead. Mm-hmm. So it looks like they will do a better job, I guess, in this case, rebuilding the blue wall than the Clinton campaign did in 2016. I think for that reason, Biden's lead is more of a stronger signal than Clinton's lead in 2016.
What do you think will be the primary issues in this campaign? They're really already there, but what are, rather than what will be, what are the primary issues in this campaign, Dr. Marineau?
Well, the biggest thing that's hurting Trump is the economic downturn that resulted from the mismanagement response to COVID. Trump's re-election bid was going to be based on the fact that the economy was doing historically well. Unemployment was low. The stock market has been doing very well. The economy was growing at a reasonable pace. That was true until about March of this year. And over the past 6 months, we've seen a hemorrhaging of jobs over a long period of time. It started to recover, but it hasn't become nearly close to what it was before the pandemic began. So the economy, I think, is going to be the biggest factor because people pay attention to how they're doing. They pay attention to whether people are working. That's very difficult right now. The lack of a coherent response to COVID. We've hit over 200,000 deaths in this country as a result of complications of COVID. over 6 million cases. I think those are going to be factors that are going to be coming up over the next 30 days. And one final thing I'll mention, because this is just in the past 2 days, the disclosure of Trump's tax returns between 2000 and 2018, suggesting that Donald Trump hasn't paid taxes on his income, except for maybe $1,000 in a few years. That is certainly something that's going to be mentioned over the next 30 days.
Dr. Williams, same question.
About 3 years ago, soon after Donald Trump was elected, I made the argument that this campaign was going to be about the difference between the president and the presidency. Right. So you have Donald Trump, the president, Donald Trump, the man, Donald Trump, the tweet storm, Donald Trump, the television actor, all of those factors that people hold against him. But then you also have the record that was his presidency. And as Dr. Marineau pointed out, if you're a pro-business moderate, if you're an evangelical Christian, regardless of what you might think of Trump the person, he has delivered the goods for you. And in that climate, I think it still would have been a very close race, because if you look at the 2018 results, the 2019 results, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the lower turnout from the left was going to be corrected for this election, and it was going to be a close race that Biden still might have a chance to win. But you take away all the presidency factors, and you hide from public view all the good things that have happened that Trump could lay claim to. And you're kind of left with just, do we like Donald Trump? And is he the kind of person we want to be a role model for our children? And is his democracy the democracy we want to build for our future? And when you ask those questions, that's a much more polarizing issue, and one that I think polls suggest Trump's not doing favorably in.
What impact does the death of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and then now the appointment or nomination and possible confirmation prior to or certainly soon after the election by the Republican Senate of Amy Coney Barrett, what outcome do you think that will have on the election? Will that energize the evangelical Christian vote, or is that base already energized as much as it can be? What will be the net effect of that nomination, Dr. Williams, and then Dr. Marineau?
I've got to be honest. I think that as smart as Mitch McConnell was in 2016 by not confirming Merrick Garland, I think they're making a mistake here. And here's the reason why. I think that the evangelical vote that loves Donald Trump has already been mobilized. But I also think that there's an element of the evangelical vote that has been pulled along out of social justice concerns, religious concerns, faith and values concerns, abortion as a concern. And when it looks like the courts are indecisive in those issues, these voters are more likely to get involved with the Republican campaign with a Trump character who they may not like for individual reasons. But if it looks like to those voters that the Supreme Court has been completely locked down, that Roe versus Wade is going to be tossed out, that they've won the judicial version of the faith and values vote, I don't know why they go ahead and hold their nose and vote for Donald Trump. They're winning at the states. They've won at the courts. They could still possibly win the Senate, even if they've lost the presidency. I think you might lose 1 or 2 percentage points of votes in swing states simply because people are going to think that the war's over, even though the final battle hasn't been fought yet. And they probably should have waited before they did this confirmation.
Dr. Marineau?
I think just to kind of build on that logic, it goes the other way too. This could actually provide motivation for more liberal-leaning voters and energize them more to show up at the polls. But I think that's right. I mean, I think by giving a 6th conservative-leaning justice in the court, it kind of takes away some of the fire and the incentive for some conservative-leaning voters who otherwise would feel very strongly about the makeup of the Supreme Court, and might just give more motivation for liberal voters to try to recapture the Senate and keep the House.
Do you think the pro-life movement, evangelical pro-life movement, rather than the broader pro-life movement, but the evangelical pro-Trump, pro-life movement has given consideration to the fact that if Roe v. Wade is overturned, that would essentially most likely return the decisions to the states? Now, in many cases, that would be favorable to the pro-life movement, but in other states, it would not be. Does that have any consideration do you think in that's a little beyond the presidential election, but certainly has application, it would seem to me, in the context of pro-life politics? Any thought on that, Dr. Williams?
I think that at least part of the battle that evangelicals have been waging is that there is some areas that we can control. There's some states that we have control over. And when you look at how demographics are divided in America, you have the red states and the red state areas, and the blue state and the blue state areas, most of the battle for the last 50 years has been about allowing conservatives to take back control in their home states and their home neighborhoods. Once that battle is over, I suspect that evangelical Christians in, say, Kentucky are going to be less concerned about what's happening in California. I think there are other issues that are a priority to evangelical voters that largely don't get talked about, areas that may be more moderate in some sense, and that you might see a shift back towards those issues in conservative-leaning states once it's no longer something they have to worry about in their neighborhood or their backyard. But Dr. Marineau may have a different view on that.
No, that's interesting. I guess
Marineau?
Because it also could be the case, because we're kind of speculating a little bit, but it also could be the case that a conservative majority on the Supreme Court finds that there's a constitutional right to life, and therefore it wouldn't return to the states because any unborn child has the right to be born. So it could also be a nationwide prohibition on abortion, potentially, depending on how they ruled it.
Yeah, especially if the conservatives could take back control of the House. Which is increasingly difficult as you look at demographics.
Right. On another area of issues and concern, with the deaths of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor here in Kentucky, and the resulting social unrest among African Americans and other individuals with concern of social justice and equity issues, what impact do you think that will have on the presidential race, for both parties? Dr. Marineau, you want to take a stab at that, and then we'll,
sure. And I think,
Dr. Williams, then you join in.
I think both parties have focused on different things. So in the ads that I've seen, for instance, for Senator Mitch McConnell, what he's focused on are the various calls to defund the police, and he opposes those kinds of measures. So I think within the Republican camp, they focus on the message that's going to mobilize their voters. Their voters feel more strongly in favor to the police and to authority, and so they're going to focus more on the instances where we've seen riots break out. I'm thinking of Portland, Oregon. That has not been the majority of cases where we've seen Black Lives Matter protests, but there have been cases of these protests turning into riots. Portland is going to be a key example of that. So they're focusing on the instances where structures have broken down and where calls to defund the police have become like the loudest. Among the Democrats, they're going to focus on the instances of police brutality and instances of police killing unarmed Black people. So I think they're going to focus on different things. Now, which message will resonate the most? I think that's to be seen. It looks like, in terms of polls, that the message that we need 4 more years of President Trump in order to keep law and order, it looks like that message hasn't resonated. One reason for that is people have said that, well, we currently have President Trump, so and we have the protests now, why would 4 more years prevent the protests that we're currently seeing? So it doesn't look like that message has yet resonated, but we also are 30 days out. That could change if we see different sorts of events and riots breaking out over the next 30 days.
The story of voting in America has, if you want to greatly oversimplify things, is that the United States has a slightly left of center population, but a slightly right of center electorate. Because the portions of our population that are less likely to vote, people from lower socioeconomic status, these tend to be predominantly Democratic voters who live in predominantly urban areas. I think my suspicion is that the voters who are already mobilized on the right to vote probably didn't need more law and order to mobilize them to vote. They already had the immigration issue, for example, which was a law and order issue that Donald Trump used very effectively in 2016. And so they may have already had, this may just be a substitute issue for something that would have already brought them to the polls. But what we are seeing on the left is that the protest movement has provided an opportunity for mobilization. And everywhere where you're seeing protests, you're seeing mobilizers from left of center or left-wing causes that are encouraging people to register to vote, that are figuring out where protesters are living and what districts they're from, that are establishing leadership in local communities to help with the mobilization effort. And so I think Dr. Marineau is right in terms of the kind of media level politics of the thing. But when you get down to voter mobilization, I think the left is going to win on this one, because they're bringing people out into politics who normally don't get involved, especially this close to an election cycle.
We all know that the popular vote does not determine the presidential winner. It's the electoral vote. 2000, 2016, we both saw minority popular vote, the candidate receiving the lesser number of popular votes winning because of the electoral college. That means that the primary attention by both campaigns is on the so-called middle or battleground states. What are the primary battleground states, and what are the respective strategies in those battleground states, and how would you assess? I'm throwing a lot out here. How would you assess the outcome there at this point, again, roughly 30 days out? Dr. Williams?
To a point that Dr. Marineau made earlier, he made this argument that Clinton's mistake was dropping the ball on some blue wall states. And early on in this campaign, what I thought, my take has been that if Joe Biden wanted to be successful, that he needed to kind of look past the traditional battleground states to the last ones that Donald Trump won that he should have won. States like Arizona, North Carolina, Georgia. All three of these are states where demographic shift suggests the Democrats could have a chance. The Democrats won North Carolina as recently in 2008. They've made inroads in Georgia, the growing Hispanic population coming of voting age in Arizona. And so what I've been paying attention to this entire time are Republicans being forced to defend that territory. It doesn't look like they have been in Georgia, but it does look like that Joe Biden has done very well in Arizona and very well in North Carolina. It also looks like the Democratic governor who's up for re-election in North Carolina is doing particularly well in polling. And so to me, that's what I'm looking for. If in the last 15 or 20 days, I see those states really slipping away from Joe Biden, I'm going to start getting very concerned about the blue wall states that were so important last year. But if Biden is still leading in North Carolina, Arizona, if he's competitive in Georgia, if he's within 2 or 3 points in Texas, I think that Donald Trump really needs to be worried about his chances in this election.
Dr. Marineau.
So yeah, for the battleground states to get to at least 270, because to win the presidency, as we were saying, you're elected by the Electoral College, not by the popular vote. So you need at least 270 Electoral College votes to win the presidency. To get those, Biden's going to need states like Florida, Ohio, Pennsylvania, North Carolina. Currently, he's up in each of those states, some of them more than others. And there's a lot of activity over the next 30 days to try to mobilize voters. Republicans have really emphasized voter mobilization efforts in Florida right now. So there's reason for the Biden campaign to not just simply wait, for the next 30 days to pass uneventfully. But it looks like right now he's up in each of those states, and he's going to need each of them to win. And he's going to need to win, I think, big Tuesday night for us to know anytime soon when the election is actually completed.
So do you think we will have to wait for a few days? What are the chances, or even a few weeks?
I think it's very possible. If we recall back in 2000, we didn't know who the president was until mid-December when the Supreme Court ruled on Bush v. Gore. But because we have such a large number of ballots that are getting mailed in, it's going to take longer to count those. I've read that it's estimated we already have around 1 million ballots that have been cast and are, in transit. So the more close the election is Tuesday night, I think the longer it's going to be before we find out who our next president is. And what complicates that is we know that the different parties have a different predisposition to voting by mail-in ballots. Democrats are more open to voting through that medium. Republicans are going to be more looking to vote at a physical in-person polling location. So it could be the case that Tuesday night, Republicans have cast more votes for Donald Trump than there have been votes counted for Democrats. So it could look like Donald Trump is ahead on election night, even if eventually, after all the votes are counted, that Biden is the eventual winner. If that sort of thing happens, we could be in for a long, drawn-out process of determining who the next president is.
We're about out of time, a couple of minutes or so. What are your thoughts on, I think most observers, I've not heard any observers say the House will change, U.S. House. Senate control. Dr. Marineau, very quickly, then Dr. Williams.
It looks like the Democrats are favored to win the Senate, but it could be a toss-up either way. But currently, it looks like they're looking at getting maybe 51, maybe even 52 seats.
Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I think that when you look at turnout data from the 2018 and 2019 elections, that all indications are that you're going to have higher Democratic turnout and a Democratic victory in both the White House and the Senate.
Isn't it interesting as we do this interview that in South Carolina, that not Democratic nominee is within a point or two, if not tied, essentially a tie with Lindsey Graham. And then down in Mississippi, Mike Espy, former USDA secretary, I think under President Clinton, is within a point or two of the incumbent appointed Republican senator there. Both of those Democratic nominees are African American. Republicans may well win both races, but those are certainly interesting dynamics at this point in time, and both races to watch, I think, on election night. Let's look at Kentucky very quickly. What's on the ballot and what's the most interesting race or races to watch? Dr. Williams.
I think, honestly, I don't think that there's much of a race between McConnell and McGrath. I think McConnell's going to walk away with it. I am curious about the Kentucky House of Representatives. And the only reason, if you look at a couple of months ago, it looked like Andy Beshear had a pretty good head of steam behind him. And that if he had been able to get out into the state and maybe campaign for some House seats, there may have been a chance that he could have leveraged his popularity and some voter turnout. The Republicans have done a pretty good job at bringing his popularity down back to below 55, 60% statewide. So that may not happen. So my bet is that the state of Kentucky in 2021 is going to look a lot like the one in 2019.
Dr. Marineau.
I agree. It looks like Senator McConnell is going to win re-election. He's pretty heavily favored to win. So we'll have 6 more years of Senator McConnell either as the majority leader or as perhaps the minority leader, depending on how the Senate race turn out. And it looks like among the House of Representative candidates, it looks like we're going to see a continuation of our current makeup with, I think, 6 Republicans and 1 Democrat. So I don't see any changes coming in that area.
Just an observation on my part, looking 6 years ago, 2014, different dynamics and situations, non-presidential year. But my feeling is that Senator McConnell's in a stronger position right now than he was. Dr. Williams, I don't know if Dr. Marineau was here then, but I think I think the senator is stronger right now than he was in 2014. Would you agree?
I definitely would. In fact, in 2014, I famously said that I thought that would be McConnell's last run. Because it was relatively close. It looked like his strength was fading. And my expectation was that we would be going into 2020 without as strong of a Republican top of the ticket in Donald Trump as what we've ended up actually having. But it turns out, though, that what happened was the exact opposite. By effectively using his position as majority leader in the Senate, McConnell's been able to basically become one of the most important senators, majority leader senators especially, of the last, say, half century or even century. And he's leveraged that to build popularity both within the state. It doesn't hurt that the Democratic Party in 6 years has not been able to find anybody who can really run against him. There just is no bench for the Democratic Party in the state, except for maybe the individual who's sitting in the governorship.
Right. Very quickly before we close, each of you, your prognostication predictions for the outcome. That's always a dangerous thing. But I'd like to hear your prediction on the percentages and the Electoral College numbers. And I realize that's kind of a guesswork at best at this point. Dr. Williams.
I'm going to go Biden with about 53 to 54% of the popular vote. I think that's going to bring him into right around 320 Electoral College votes. But with Dr. Marineau, I don't think that we're going to know that until probably Friday or Saturday, because there are going to be several states that will be relatively close. But I think that Biden in the mail-in ballot's probably going to end up coming out with a victory.
Dr. Marineau, same question.
I'll say Biden, and I'll throw out 352 Electoral College votes. That's the number I saw on the 538.com. So I'll go with that number.
Very good. Any October surprises? Do you expect an October surprise? Either of you.
Well,
I think the only surprise in 2020 is that there will be no surprises.
right. If nothing happened over the next month,
that would be the only surprise.
That's the surprise.
Yeah.
Well, gentlemen, thank you very much. I'm sure that we will come together after the election, if not early in 2021, to discuss the election returns and the how things look in America as well as Kentucky in 2021. This is John Chowning for Dialogue on Public Issues, thanking Dr. Shawn Williams, Dr. Josiah Marineau for this discussion of election 2020. And let me encourage all of you, if you've not already voted by early voting or absentee voting, please do so. It's a very important thing to do.